All right, how's everybody doing? It is Monday, April 29th, about 9:15 p.m. I took most of today off from social media. The news just got to be a little bit too much. But I did have a couple of things that I wanted to get out of my brain before the end of the evening. Finally, someone said it to Joe Rogan's face. There's a great article in The Atlantic from a couple days ago by Helen Lewis. Should the star podcaster take any responsibility for how he uses his power? And if you like this video, please click like, leave a comment, subscribe to my page. It's free. This first paragraph is just fantastic. And it's one of my favorite things about The Atlantic. They have such good writers, man. She starts the following. Recently, I felt a great disturbance in the world of podcasts, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in horror and were suddenly silenced. Someone had been on Joe Rogan's show and pointed out that getting your opinions entirely from stand-up comics, Bigfoot forums, and various men named Dave might not be the optimal method for acquiring knowledge. Rogan fans were appalled at this disrespect. The culprit was British writer Douglas Murray, who confronted Rogan earlier this month over the podcaster's decision to platform a series of guests with, shall we say, minority views on the Second World War. The obvious example is a guy named Daryl Cooper, who fashions himself a historian, who has lately taken a sharp turn into Nazi apologism. He says, I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's #1 podcast, Mr. Murray told Rogan. This kind of direct challenge is quite simply not how things are done in the anti-woke brosphere, which is brutally hierarchical. Free speech absolutism does not include criticism. Oh, man. So Murray's pointed criticism of Rogan's approach, made right to his face, has prompted other aftershocks across the Rogan Broverse, that loose collection of comics and podcasters who dominate the podcast market. The immense fallout from the mild back and forth demonstrates that nothing splinters of movement like victory. When the Rogan-verse could paddle in the safe waters of pronouns, Joe Biden jokes, and COVID's conspiracy theories, everyone got along just fine. I mean, it's like they were all fine when Trump was running, but now he's president again. And even Joe Rogan is like, I don't know about this immigration shit you're doing there, brother. You're going a little too far with taking away due process from literally everybody. But Murray, what was his first name? Doug? I want to say Doug. Yeah, Doug Murray. He's British, and he has the kind of British accent that instantly makes Americans think that he's smart. Certainly people who listen to Joe Rogan. However, Mr. Murray, despite doing this, comes with a bit of a disclaimer. He was on the Joe Rogan Experience to promote his new book. See, this just tells us that people are complicated. And people have different sides and believe different things. So this guy who was confronting Joe Rogan about being irresponsible in how he uses his platform was there to promote his book on democracies and death cults, which strongly supports Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's war against Hamas in Gaza. Later in the episode, Murray also clashed with comedian Dave Smith, whom Rogan had invited along as a kind of emotional support podcaster. And to his credit, Dave Smith has long been a critic of Israel's policies and military actions, and they had some exchanges about that. But Murray's point was like over the past few years, Rogan has invited on a horde of crackpots who see themselves as a lone Galileo standing up to big pharma or the deep state. But nevertheless, his reach, popularity, and patronage powers are so great that few guests want to challenge him. Others might reasonably claim that Rogan gets quite enough criticism from the liberal mainstream. Okay, here we go. So they got into this big discussion about Americans using military support to support other countries, and they had some disagreements about that. This crack runs right down the anti-woke sphere, which includes other members of what was once called the intellectual dark web. Conservative substacker Andrew Sullivan has repeatedly criticized the Free Press founder Barry Weiss for what he sees as its reluctance to stand up for the free speech rights of anti-Israeli activists. And that same guy, Daryl Cooper, has argued elsewhere that Winston Churchill and not Adolf Hitler was the chief villain of World War II. And another one of Rogan's guests, Ian Carroll, claimed on Twitter that Israel did 9/11. So there's that. But the crux of the argument between Murray and Rogan: does Rogan's huge success and influence confer any responsibility or duty on him to patrol the borders of allowable discourse on his show? Rogan says no. He's just a regular guy who never asked for any of this. His critics retort that his commitment to provocative conversations and dangerous ideas has made him reflexively anti-mainstream, pushing him towards conspiracism. And Murray made a comment about that guy, Daryl Cooper's podcast, the guy who thinks the Nazis were the good guys. He said, it's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk about that. And plus, it's like, there was a thing that happened last year during the campaign where Joe Rogan went on this huge like riff, and he was talking about Joe Biden and his dementia and all of this stuff, and he recounted this whole story of Joe Biden talking about, he said during a speech that during the Revolutionary War in 1776, that George Washington gave an order to shut down all the airports. And he and whoever his guest was, they were laughing hysterically about this and talking about how addle-brained Joe Rogan was. And it's 1776, and Joe Biden said shut down the airports. And Rogan has an assistant on the show who Googles things while they're recording. His name's Jamie. And Jamie piped in and said, actually, that was Donald Trump who said that. And Joe Rogan was like, wait, what? And Jamie played the video. And Joe Rogan was sitting there. He's like, oh, okay, well, whatever. Joe Rogan's still too old. And it's like, but it's just bro-y nihilism, man. There's no standard for anything. It's all just LOL, nothing matters. And, they're just asking questions. And Murray said, I don't think that the world is a studio in Texas. That's where Rogan records his podcast. And we just riff endlessly and things don't have any meaning. I think there are things that very much matter. And if they very much matter, then you have to put in the work to get shit right. And so it's like in the days after this episode aired, Joe Rogan had on guests where they were making fun of Doug Murray. And the one of the points in this article is like, you would never see somebody like Anderson Cooper do that. You interview somebody and then a week later with a different guest be making fun of that person that he had on the week before. And, so I'll just read the closing paragraph here. The whole episode has revealed a major break between the members of the Roganverse who still have an attachment to journalism, such as Murray, who is an associate editor of a conservative magazine called The Spectator, and those who regard all information sources as basically equal. The incentive structures and thought patterns we would typically associate with the entertainment business are not the same as those we would expect to see in journalism or academia, said another commentator. In other words, don't get your opinions on Israel or anything else entirely from stand-up comics, Bigfoot forums, or guys named Dave. Anyway, I vehemently disagree with Douglas Murray and his views on the Israeli government, the Israeli military, and the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, I'm also incredibly grateful that he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and stood up to Joe Rogan. Good for him.